Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Reason We Learn. I'm your host, Deb Philman. At The Reason We Learn, we aspire to be part of the solution. The purpose of this show is to take a good, honest, potentially painful look at the way kids are being educated. We know we can do better, and this is where we'll talk about how. Let's learn something. Question for you. What does of color mean? What does it mean? If you hear the term of color, people of color, person of color, what do you immediately think of? Okay. Next question. How do you know? How do you know that someone is of color? How would you decide that a person is of color? Would you do it based on looks? Would you do it based on their looks plus what they tell you? Would you do it only based on what they tell you? How much of their looks? Like, how would you decide? Now, imagine that you have to decide because you're a hiring manager and you're hiring for a major corporation that has as an aspirational goal hiring 20% or making sure that 20% of its workforce is of color. How would you measure that? How would you figure it out? How would you figure out whether you'd already achieved that goal or how far away from that goal you were? How would you look at each of your employees and make that determination? Would you have to literally look at them? Would you go by some self-ID they'd checked off on a box? Would you validate that by sight? Is sight good enough? Are there people who can sort of pass as? What percentage of color do they need to be? So if, mom is black, dad is white, and they look pretty white, are they white or are they of color? If they're Hispanic, are they of color? What if you can't really tell? You can't I don't know, they're really tan. They could be Hispanic, they could be Asian, they could be, Ashkenazi Jew, they could be Sephardic Jew, they could, I don't really know. What is of color? And the reason I'm asking you is that this term is coming up again. I saw it first of all on Twitter today. Adam Coleman and a couple other people were talking about it. But ironically, I saw that conversation and I participated in a little bit and I was joking around with them about, I always thought that I had, color. I've got a lot of pink in my skin. And certainly when I go in the sun, I'm of color and beet red. I look like a lobster, at least at first. And then I might eventually tan and I get a bunch of freckles. My freckles are of color. Sometimes they join into one big freckle and you might call it a tan-ish. Anyway, so we joked about it a little bit, but it got very, very serious later in the day when my husband dropped by my office here to tell me that he'd just watched a video for his corporation, very, very large energy corporation that does have involvement with the government, does take government subsidies. So therefore, one would think is on the hook for equal opportunity employment laws, et cetera. And the video he had to watch was from the diversity director, the diversity commissar, as I like to call them. And it was about how excited they were. They had come close or almost reached for the year their 20% aspiration, the aspirational goal of people of color. They closed comments on the video from the start. So it's not like people were asking questions and then closed comments. There weren't any questions permitted. So nobody could ask, what do you mean by of color? And they certainly didn't answer that question proactively. They could have been watching and wondering, did I count? Was I one of those people? They may or may not know. Now, I tend to think they mean black and not black, Hispanic, Asian, and anybody with a dark tan or Arab or whatever, because the group that supposedly helped them determine that it should be 20%, it sounds like a pretty arbitrary number to me, but whatever, was the BEST group within the organization. Now, what do you think BEST stands for? I was wondering, what is this acronym? There's so many acronyms around diversity. Well, this one really took the cake. BEST stands for Black Executive Strategy Team. BEST. Anyway, so it was their recommendation. This group formed informally after the George Floyd incident within the company. They took it upon themselves to form a group of Black executives. And now they have the full approval of the CEO. in the executive leadership to operate as an official group giving advice to everybody else, and especially, of course, the diversity director. And that is where they came up with the 20%. But no information is given to the employees about how they arrived at that number, how they decided they were 20% too short on people of color, how they decided what the metric was going to be for evaluating who amongst them was already of color, and how they would move forward. This is the question I really have with evaluations, raises, hiring, firing, etc., with this new aspirational goal in mind. What role does shareholder value play in this, if any? If any. So what are the marching orders for the hiring managers, for the HR team? Are they supposed to specifically recruit people of color, and how exactly are they supposed to do that? And again, this goes back to the what is of color, and how are you telling people about it within the organization and outside of the organization? This is where these things start to fall apart. If I came to you today with a video saying that it was just announced that the NBA has set an aspirational goal of 20% people not of color, namely white, to play in the NBA, what would you say? Would you say that's nuts? That's racist? That's crazy? That why? What benefit will we derive from making sure that 20% of the basketball players are white? Just that alone. Well, the same is true if it's an energy company. The same is true. The color of a person's skin really ought to have nothing whatsoever to do with their ability to do the job or not do the job. That's anti-racist. This is racist, what they're doing. This isn't anti-racist. This is actually racist. And we don't have answers to any of these questions. I have more questions for my, after I get the answers to these questions, I'm sure. But I thought I'd put it to you guys. Now it's this little video. What do you think? What does of color mean? And should we be using this term? If so, why? If not, why not? Should we be hiring according to this term? And if so, how are you going to determine that a person sitting in front of you is of color? Are you going to just use your eyeballs? Is that what we're doing now? Or is there some other criteria? Are we going to ask people the currently illegal questions about their background? Like, so, are you ADOS? Does your family trace its ancestry back to slaves? And if so, can I see some proof, please? And or are we going to say, are your relatives from Africa or the Caribbean? And can I see some proof, please? What kind of color are you? See, I always thought that was sort of a microaggression. That's what I was told, not to look at somebody and go, where are you from? I personally don't think it's a microaggression, but I do think it's one of those things you're not supposed to ask during an interview. And you're certainly not supposed to base it on how somebody looks. Seems irrelevant at the very least. But what do you guys think? Am I wrong? How about what my husband should do next? See, I personally think he should be putting his resume out there and trying to find some contracting work or someplace where he doesn't have to be the employee of a racist company. But we may not have that luxury in the near future. So let's just hope he doesn't get fired because he's not of color. And with that, I will leave you to ponder the question. I hope I answered the question in the comments. I look forward to reading your answers. I look forward to learning something from you all. And I hope you're having a wonderful holiday season. Please check out my new website at thereasonwelearn.com and consider supporting the channel and sharing this video, liking this video if you've appreciated the update. And I will see you in the next one.